Hi there, my name is Mohamad, and I'm the host of the Reconfigured Podcast, a show that explores the intersection of technology, culture, and society. We bring professionals to talk about their extended experience or discuss about a specific topic that might interest the audience. All of our episodes are available for free with no cost to the general public. Just a quick reminder that we are always on the lookout for interesting guests who can share their unique perspective on the topics we cover, or you can pitch in a new topic to discuss on the pod. Just reach out to us on social media or apply to our available opportunities posted on Polywork. So, welcome to the show. Today I'm with Liz. Liz, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. And I'm happy to be here, by the way. So I am Liz Acosta. I am in San Francisco, in California, in the United States. I am currently a developer advocate for a company called Skyflow. Um, Before that, I was a developer at Twilio, working primarily on the SMS API and then on an internal testing tools platform. But before that, I was a social media manager for a dog and cat magazine. And uh, yeah, my degrees originally, or my degrees in filmmaking and fine arts. So it's been a very non-traditional uh, path to tech, but here I am.
So, you currently work as a developer advocate at Skyflow. Would you like to talk more about Skyflow and what they provide?
Yes, I actually would love to talk about Skyflow, and not just because I work there and it's my job to talk about it. Um, but Skyflow, I feel like, is a product that solves like a real world problem in a very developer focused way. So Skyflow is a data privacy vault that helps companies isolate, protect, and govern their most sensitive information. And it's all available via an API. So in many ways, Skyflow abstracts away like some of the more complex aspects of data privacy, which ultimately makes it easier to meet privacy requirements and reduce the impact of data breaches. Like, can't necessarily like prevent them altogether, but definitely reduce the impact. Um, and honestly, like as a former developer who's had to deal with reacting to changes in different privacy regulations. For instance, GDPR, that was a thing that went into effect while I was at Twilio. When I first learned about Skyflow, I was like, I wish this was something I'd had back then. This is something that actually solves a problem. It's actually it's pretty easy to use. Um, and yeah, when I was applying for Skyflow and researching the product, I had the moment of like, well, this is it. Like, this is the solution that developers have been needing, and I appreciate that it's uh, very developer focused, very developer first. Um, and I know Sean's been on here and he's also talked about it, but yeah,
So I actually got Sean before. It's if you want to give like a small recap, it's basically like a data vault, but it's just a
yeah,
very easy. It's a very easy to use data vault with a very easy API.
yeah, and that's exactly it. Is that it allows you to very like programmatically handle your most sensitive data, um, and it works in a way that I think caters to the way developers think, so that you're not busy trying to learn a whole bunch of new things. You're like, it's an API, it makes sense, right?
Yep. So it's mostly like for people who want to do like PCI compliancy, or they want to store, let's say, very sensitive information, but they just don't want to do a good amount of work. So they just use Skyflow to do that for them.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, PCI is one use case, but there's also like healthcare information, all of that stuff. Essentially, the data that, you know, you wouldn't want to make copies of and hand out all around a neighborhood, right? Like, you wouldn't want to copy your social security number and paste it everywhere. The data that you want to keep private, right? Because it, if someone gets a hold of it, they can do malicious stuff with it. And yes, like companies can like figure out how to do this on their own, or like we can give you you can use the Vault, use the API, and then offload having to do that work or think about that and get back to like what you really want to do, right? It's kind of like if like I want to trying to think of a good analogy.
Here's the thing.
Like,
I'll give a point about this. So a lot of people used to say, I want to do my own authentication, and I got actually damn more from Fusion Auth. A lot of people want to do
mm-hmm,
their own authentication, and doing your own authentication means you hold responsible for every single thing that happens. When doing your authentication and there's, let's say, a breach occurs, you're now the holder of this kind of problem. And when you're developing a product, it's very difficult for you to manage the authentication, to manage the business logic, and to manage the application, let's say, as a whole, as infrastructure. The cheapest, not going to say the cheapest, but the cheapest on the long term, let's say business wise, is to offset certain elements to services that exist rather than trying to maintain them on the long run. So doing your own, let's say, authentication service on, let's say, starting project is a cheap way to start authentication. But when your product hits a very high level and it's degrading your product service, it becomes very difficult for you to offset that versus if you started with, let's say, a service that does this for you. And then as you scale up, you don't have to worry much about it. This also implies for security as well, because a lot of people would say, okay, we're going to develop, let's say, a way to secure certain elements. But the problem is that it works with 1 to 2 files when you're testing, but it doesn't work well when you're doing 10,000. Whereas someone else would
mm-hmm.
tell you like, okay, I give you a solution that can handle millions of records. You don't have to worry. All you have to do is just know how to use the API and you're good to go.
Exactly. And so that is also, so I was trying to think of like an example, like an analogy, but like, I don't know, like a house, right? You're like, I want to own a house. I want to maybe do some customization to my house, but I don't necessarily want to build the house from the ground up because A, that means I'd have to learn a lot about like building houses and I don't know anything about it. And B, like if I screw up the house, it's kind of just on me. So why not have someone who's like good at building houses come build my house? But then like things that I want to do that are fun, like, I don't know, add a hot tub in the backyard, I can do that. Right. Which is exactly like what you're saying. It's just like kind of offloading that responsibility to someone else who's just focused on that instead of trying to spread your focus everywhere. Like it allows you to get back to doing what you really want to do. Right. Like, so if you're like at a company that, you want to learn, you're a merchant, right? And so you're like, I want to be able to accept payments. Well, and like put out product, right? Like I'm a merchant, I want to make product and sell products because that's what I enjoy doing. Like if you also have to think about like, well, okay, now I have to figure out how to like store PCI or like be in PCI compliance, that's not fun for me, right? But exactly like your point, it's like kind of just like leave it to the experts, right? And not only that, but with Skyflow, it feels like, yeah, leave it to the experts. And also here's this really elegant, sophisticated API that you can use, right? So it's not like you don't have to learn a bunch of extra complex stuff to use it. It's distilled down to something that all developers understand, right?
Yeah, the thing is that most developers would take pride into doing a certain thing because they take like the joy of writing code for it. But sometimes from a business perspective, that might not be very optimal. So it's just
Right.
easier for you to save time and get into market when you use a service.
Yeah. Well, and I think as a developer, it also allows you to focus on the problem that you signed up for, right? So it's like, if you're like, well, we're going to develop this app that does something, I'm trying to think, like we want to develop an app that does this really cool thing, and or it like provides really cool data visualizations, right? And you as a developer are like, sweet, I'm really into data visualization, right? Like I love doing that kind of stuff. I love the D3 library. I love data visualizations. But then if it's like, oh, by the way, you also have to build a privacy vault, like it might be like, that's not what I signed up for, right? So
So
that
you realize you just have to offset the stuff that you can't do, rather than trying to hack things and just trying to do them. Just use a service. You're just good to go and get into market as fast as possible, because
exactly.
time costs much more than just allocating resources, and time cannot be returned back. Whereas if you gain time, you can get into market faster, which means you can make actually more profit onto that from a
Right.
business perspective.
Yes, from a business perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. So, as a developer advocate at Skyflow, what is the role of a developer advocate in your perspective?
So yeah, this is always an interesting question that I get asked a lot. So what is a developer advocate, right? And I feel like we could probably devote an entire podcast to this. But without getting too much into it, I see a developer advocate as someone who falls under this like larger umbrella of developer relations. And so then what is developer relations? Well, the origin story of developer relations says that a long time ago in a Silicon Valley far, far away, the first developer evangelist was or started at Apple, right? In the 80s, when they needed to get developers interested in writing software for the Mac computer, right? So at that point, the goal was to generate interest in like a technical product. So now developer relations has evolved to include like developer experience, developer communities, developer education, and developer advocacy. And so the way I see developer advocacy is that the point is to establish and nurture relationships with the folks who are actually using your product every day, right? So in particular, a developer advocate is someone who can speak to many different audiences about technical topics. So whether we're trying to communicate with developers about the product or trying to communicate to the product team to tell them what developers are asking for, right? And for me personally, it's about making the most of my ADHD brain and my diverse set of talents and skills. And I also get to really lean into my superpower, which is empathy. You might hear some people say that a developer advocate is just an engineer who happens to have people skills, but I think it's a little bit more than that. And I also don't like dismissing engineers and saying like, oh, they don't have people skills. It's just a variety of skills, right?
But you still need to talk with people. So let's say if
You
I'm an
still do.
engineer. Yep. So I'm the kind of person who just likes to sit on a computer, just write code, enjoy. If you put me on a presentation, I might like freeze a little bit. I'm just like, wait a second, I'm trying to work this thing. So there are some people, in short, I make it short. There's a lot of people who are really good at doing technical stuff, but they lack the speaking and introducing themselves, because they are the kind of person like myself, an introvert, would like we prefer to do things behind the scene and just get things done because we know this is our expertise. Whereas going to introduce to people, sometimes it just drains us down. We might feel like uh, this is too much effort to do. Other people might enjoy talking with other people. They get very energetic behind of it. But some people feel like they're drained. They cannot proceed forward with it. They have to focus on doing the right thing. Like I'm the kind of person, if you tell me to do, let's say, a certain X, a task, which is X, and you start talking with me, I would probably have a very hard time either focusing on X or communicating on the thing. So I have to do one thing at the same time. So either I have to do the work right or I have to communicate.
Yes, I can actually relate to that because I know I'm a very outgoing introvert, so people also I love working with people, I love talking to people, and it's very exhausting. So like if I'm at a conference, like I definitely need to just like go back. I'm not the person who's like hanging out at the after parties because I usually just need to go to my room and like rest a little bit. Um, but the thing, what I like about being a developer advocate is I feel like I understand your mindset where you're like, I just want to solve the problem, right? Like I have a problem and I want to solve it and I want someone to explain it to me in a way that makes sense to me so I can arrive at the solution quicker, right? Um and and I enjoy being able to context switch between all of that, right? So like if I'm talking to you about Skyflow, I'm going to switch up how I do that versus if I'm talking to like a salesperson about Skyflow or if I'm talking about someone who's completely non-technical, right? I enjoy I like people so much that I enjoy figuring out what makes them tick. And so that's I feel like another aspect of developer advocacy, right? Being able to understand what the other person needs and respond to that.
But the thing is that how do you know what this person does need? So let's take, for example, Skyflow. If I want to go, let's say, for an example, I want to tell someone, okay, you have this problem and we could solve it to you. How would you advocate towards it for someone? So let's say I'm a developer. I want to do, let's say, for example, you didn't know that I want to solve a problem with data privacy. How would you approach to me that I have to use Skyflow? How things would go?
Um, that is a good question. So I think another thing that's cool about developer advocacy as opposed to like sales is I get a little freedom in not having to sell you the product, right? So if I talk to you and you don't, you're like in the end you're like, I don't know, maybe Skyflow is not the solution. That's okay for me, right? Because what matters most to me is that I created a relationship with you where you were like, hey, Liz is really cool. I talked to her about this problem. I understood it. And it's not the solution I need, but like, you'll remember me, right? But to figure out, it kind of feels like being a therapist in that asking a lot of questions, right? Because every person is very different. We all have very different perspectives. We all think about things very differently. And so what I try to do is figure out where the other person is. And the way you do that is you ask questions, right? It's kind of a little bit like, I don't know, like when you are testing software, right? Like, okay, let me ask this question. Let me figure out where the boundaries are and then get hone in closer and ask those questions and like, okay, so you have a data privacy problem issue you need to solve. The next question is, well, I might ask, well, what team do you work on, right? So how are you involved in solving this problem? Are you architecting it? Are you actually going to be the one who's writing the code to like integrate with your solution? So finding out like where like you sit in relation to everything else, right? And then finding out okay, like what are your current pain points, right? Like, and then what are we actually working with? And then go from there. Because then if I find, because you can quickly launch into the pitch, right? But then you might find out that actually it's not an appropriate solution for you, right? And then you've done all this work and it turns out that's not what they need. And so it's important, I think, to ask the questions first, like I said, like a therapist, figure out where the other person is at and then try to work to their needs. Does that make sense?
But the thing is that when you're a therapist and I want to go, let's say, to a therapist, I would know which therapist I want to go to, or I would ask people what kind of therapist I want to go to. So if I want to get to you to ask you about a question, how would I communicate with you? Do I meet you at events, or is it like an online forum, or is it like you would comment on a certain post on, let's say, Hacker News? And let's say, for example, someone writes an article about privacy, someone answers the questions, answers in the comment like, okay, how can I perform this in the current workflow? And you come up and you'd be like writing a comment, hey, I'm an advocate at, let's say, X company. We do this. Would I like to show you, let's say, a demo on how to do it on a technical perspective? Let's go back to the therapist question, which is, when I want to go to a therapist, either there's a word of mouth about the
Hmm.
therapist being a good therapist, or at least I need to know how to reach to that therapist. When a developer wants to reach to a developer advocate, there's either the idea of, I know the developer advocate that I want to ask questions to because they have an online presence that plays a significant role. Like, I can ask them the questions and the developer advocate would start telling me, you can do X, Y, and Z. Or I can, let's say, meet at an event, there's a booth, or let's say you're randomly chatting with someone and you can pop in, or any of that. What's your thought on this?
Um, I think it depends, right? Because you have to figure out where are the people, like where is everyone hanging out, right? Um, with Skyflow specifically, yes, we're at events and we're giving talks. We also have a community, we have a community Slack, so you can go in there and ask questions, and that's also a good place to be like, I'm going to be at this conference. Are you going to be there? Like, let's meet up. Um, I feel like ultimately, though, it has to be organic and sincere. Like, developers are very savvy, right? they they can tell when something is not authentic. They can tell when you're not being sincere. They can tell when they're being marketed at, right? So however the connection is made, it needs to be done with sincerity and authenticity, I think, and like very honest. And so that's why, like, I can't like if I, like, I don't know, at a conference was like giving out like branded swag and I was like, here, use this, like, that may not work so much as like I'm at a booth, you come up to me, we start talking and speaking to I don't know what the other person actually needs, like being honest and being authentic, being present. But I think, like, when it comes to like, okay, how do you make yourself available to developers? It really depends on like where they're hanging out, right? So Slack and Discord are probably good places. And I think it's a matter of knowing your audience, right? So if your audience or those developers are all on Reddit, like asking questions, or not Reddit, but Stack Overflow, if they're predominantly in Stack Overflow, then that's where I'd want to be, right? Like, it's in Stack
Actually,
Overflow.
Reddit is a very valid
Reddit is,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah, I actually do use Reddit. It's you'd be surprised to find out that Reddit sometimes have very good things, much more than Stack Overflow.
Yeah, no, and there's that one subreddit that's like, explain it to me like I'm 5, right? I love that one because anytime it like like if I'm doing research on something and I'm like, okay, I think I understand, I'll use it to like confirm it, or I'll use it as like the launch pad for my research because I'm like, okay, I understand the basic stuff. No, Reddit is a great
It's a good search
resource. Not
engine.
Yeah,
It's a good
it
search engine.
really, it's kind
It's
of interesting how it's become that, right?
no, like
Like,
anything, any kind of question you just write the question at the end. Just write Reddit, you would get a
mhm.
value. And that's the fun part about this, is that Reddit is cut into places specific for that specific thing. So if you have AWS questions, you will find it on r/AWS or r/cloud. You will not find
Yep.
it on some random shady subreddit or any of that. So the cool thing about it is that the type of person who goes to that subreddit is specific to that subreddit. It's not some random dude. So let's say on the AWS part, if you're going to ask for, let's say, an Amazon question of, let's say, for example, using SQS, there's going to be someone from AWS who actually worked on the SQS team will come up and answer you and tell you like, hey, I worked on the team. This is how you do it.
Yeah.
It's like out of the random.
It's so true. And this is not software related, but I was in Tahoe last week snowboarding, and I was trying to find out there, like, because there's like a huge winter storm too. So I was trying to find out which mountain resorts were open, like actually like where the lifts were running. And, it was hard to find official information. And then I hopped on the Tahoe subreddit and was able to find out. But yeah, it's very like granular and very specific. I should be hanging out. I wonder if there's probably like a privacy, like digital or data privacy sub in there. I should check it out.
Yeah, there is. There's an r/privacy. But I think is that the thing with subreddit is that it has submods. So advertising, let's say, for a specific product might be forbidden a little bit.
No, you can't do that. You can't do that. I actually so my relationship with Reddit actually goes back, because when I was working as a social media manager, right, we were always trying to figure out how to get something to go viral. And we'd identified like Reddit is kind of one way. But you have to be very careful about how you do it, because I couldn't just go in and be like, oh, read this article on Dogster, because you can't do that. And you end up, and you don't even realize, and you end up like shadow banned. Yeah, I know. Yes. I've had to try to like hack that. And it comes back to what I was saying. You have to be authentic, right? So, yeah.
Yeah.
No, so, I would not go on Reddit and just be like, use Skyflow. I would be going in there and like genuinely talking about privacy, because I care about it. So yeah.
Actually, one of the things that I realized, some people ask me for technical questions, and it's not the fun part. On Reddit, I usually use it for memes. And then some guy sent me a message just like, hey, I found you on r/memes. I checked your profile and you seem like a developer. Can you help me with something code-wise?
Yeah.
And I did help him. He's like, I discovered you from like your memes. Your memes are really good, but I have a problem. But I have a problem with the code, and I have a deadline near. So you're my best shot. Can you help me with this? I was like, okay, I can help you with that.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Yeah,
it's like
that's great.
It's like the kind of things. It's like you can talk about privacy, but you don't have to sell the product. People will come up and see your profile, and they come up and see, like, let's say, developer advocate at Skyflow. So they come up and they check, okay, what's Skyflow? It's a service that offers a data vault as an API. It's like, okay, so this person knows what they're saying. I should listen to them, and then I should ask them about the product. How does it work? This is how things work on Reddit. Don't spam people telling them, hey, please use the product.
Can't. Yeah. And that's not true to myself either. Like, I'm not that kind. I can't. I'm a real person, sometimes to my own detriment, right? But you'd be a great developer advocate.
I don't know about this. Like, imagine if I'm surfing on Reddit posting memes, and all of a sudden some guy's like, hey, can you help me with something? That's so weird.
No, you'd be good at it.
I'm not the kind of person who likes to be very social when it comes to developer advocacy. I like to write code. It's like, I really like to write code.
But see, that's a cool thing, is that there's a place for everyone, because like, that's why developer advocate teams are so great, right? Because like everyone has different strengths. Like, I admit, like, I am not the strongest developer. Like, I am not, like, my code is not that strong. I can admit that, right? But like, I have like maybe a good idea, and then I could like work with you and be like, okay, I have this idea for this demo. Like, can you help me write the code for it, right? And working together like that. But it sounds like, I mean, you're doing like this podcast and stuff, so you must like talking to people. But but if you ever decide to change your mind, I'm just saying.
It's just like, okay, if let's say, for an example, if I want to become a developer advocate, what are the things that I need to do? Let's, hypothetically speaking, I want to get into developer advocacy. What am I supposed to do?
That is a good question. And
So, and I want to break the mold. So, let's say, for example, I'm the kind of person who's like shy, not shy, but it's like I would say I'm not very comfortable being very social too much in front of people. So, on the internet, you can still, let's say, do things not in person. So, going to events and stuff like that, you might drain you down. If someone wants to start with developer advocacy, that means you have to talk with people, you have to communicate with developers, you have to tell them X, Y, and Z. And by the time you work with developers, you don't focus too much on writing code because you have other things to do. So your coding skills might lag behind compared to what the market is, because the market is accelerating at a very fast pace. And by fast, I mean like every single month you might have a JavaScript library popping up or a framework, so you have to keep on that. It's a joke. But the thing is that with when you're a developer
is
advocate,
it
how
a
do
joke
you
though?
it's I don't know if it's a joke now anymore. I usually joke about it, but I don't think it's a joke anymore.
Yeah.
But the thing is that as a developer advocate, you have the problem with keeping your technical skills sharp and communicating with people at the same time, which is very difficult. So people would realize, okay, I might keep on honing my technical skills because it's more, I'm going to say this, it's more easier and more granular to control versus communicating with people because you don't know the outcomes. But how does someone get into developer advocacy?
Well, so, and I think I mentioned this, developer advocacy falls under what I feel like is this bigger umbrella of developer relations, and it's still like an emerging specialty. So there's actually lots of places where it can go, right? And so under that umbrella of developer relations, I think the first thing you have to do is ask yourself, like, okay, well, why do I want to do this? What am I drawn to, right? For me, I was drawn to wanting to implement some of my other skills. So, like, in my current job or current role, my current iteration of developer advocate, I get to do a lot of writing. I get to do some like design work. I get to, touch on other skills I have, right? And so for me, when I was thinking about switching from developer to developer advocacy, it was like, well, what am I missing? What am I craving? What do I want? And I was like, I want to work with people. I want to lean into my like superpower, my empathy superpower, right? I want to go to conferences. I like doing that kind of stuff. I like setting up, I like teaching. But like, let's say like you're someone who's like, well, I still want to write strong code, right? Like I still want to be writing code every single day because I want to keep my coding chops up. Um, then there's a place for that too, right? Because like you could go into, maybe that's more like developer education, where then you're helping to write like demo code, or you're writing more like example applications, right? For instance, like I feel like, at Skyflow, Sean is a much better like developer than he's a stronger developer than I am, and I would hope so because his degree is in that. But like he has this like Instabread sample application that uses Skyflow, and I couldn't do that, right? Like I'm not going to sit down and like spin up this whole little application. But he can do that. But I can also come in and then be like, okay, well, I can read this code. I know what's going on in it. So then I can teach it. So there's a place for everyone. And so I think it starts with, well, what are my motivations, right? Why am I drawn to developer relations? Why not just stay and develop, just straight up development, and then go from there, right? Because I think the developer relations is so broad, and there's so many different needs to fulfill under that umbrella, that it's about, okay, why do I want to do this, and then moving in that direction, right?
But some people don't use the developer relations job as a way to get away from writing code and just get into talking with people, but less writing code. So let's say, for an example, I face this a lot. When you're writing code for quite some time, you really get bored of writing code. So you no longer write code for fun, but rather you're
Mm.
forced to write code for your job. So some people might choose, let's say, product management or developer advocacy as a way to bridge themselves out of writing code and talk with people as like taking a break. And then they keep on writing code for fun so they can enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel similarly. So when, and I mean, not necessarily with code, but um, yeah, I mean, if it gets to a point where something that's your hobby, that was your hobby, then becomes something you don't want to do, but you still want to like make use of the experience that you have in that, then that's, that's one way to do it. And, that actually sounds like a really smart strategy, right? Because then you're still preserving the aspects of writing code that you love, right? And
It's
when it's
basically
not
you
something,
have a it's basically like you have a job and you have your coding habit rather than your
yeah,
coding habit is your job.
right, exactly. Or your coding hobby, let's call it that, right? So like it's still your hobby. Like it's sometimes a hobby is no longer fun when you have to do it, right? like or like when the stakes get really high, right? But if you're someone who just has like your little home code lab and you just do it for fun, um, that might feel a lot better. I mean, I kind of feel similarly, right? Like I it was fun being an engineer, a developer at Twilio. I learned a lot. And sometimes, like, it felt like, if I screwed up there, then it had a much bigger impact. Like, if I wrote bad code, right? If I introduced a bug, then it had a much bigger impact than, like, I don't know. If I do like a little demo and a bug shows up in a demo, that's like, it's not going to bring all of Skyflow down and then customers aren't like getting their product, right? Um, but it all depends on like what stress are you okay with and what do you want to just be a hobby, right?
The
Um,
demo problems are like expected. Like some people will be like, oh, "Okay, this is a demo thing," but usually you make sure the demo is working because
yeah.
you want to represent. But usually, like a corporation or a company, if you're doing a product, there's basically uh, you, the senior developer has to check your code, has to do code reviews, and then the tech lead has to do code reviews. So the kind of error kind of slows down because the other person has to really test your code to make sure
Hmm.
it's working before deploying it to production.
Right.
But if you're working at a company that can't afford a QA and the tech lead has a lot of things to do, there's a possibility he might merge a bug for you. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it might happen, but depends on how size the company is.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Um, but yeah, no, I developer relations is or developer advocacy. Because actually, I get this question a lot. People ask me, how do I make that switch? And then I think you just go for it. Like you just YOLO, right? And what I did is I just started reaching out and like being like, hey, and like letting my networks know that I was thinking about making the switch. Um, and it's interesting because at Twilio, I had actually applied for a developer relations role twice over there and didn't get it both times, and it just wasn't the right time, right? But I persisted with it, and so finally I get to do it at Skyflow, and I really love it. I think it's fantastic work. I think the primary thing that a developer, someone who wants to go into developer relations, needs to have is just that desire to help people, right?
It's more about making the world a better place.
To some degree, sure. I mean, there's lots of ways to make the world a better place, but the way I see it is if someone comes to me and they have a positive experience with me, whether or not they use Skyflow, then that's a win. Um, because, and this maybe kind of goes back to your question about like, well, how do you get in touch with a developer advocate? It's like those relationships are the things that really matter. So it's like, if I talk to someone at a conference and we have a really positive interaction and they're like, well, like, I don't necessarily need Skyflow, but maybe they're talking to a friend who they're talking about some data privacy issue they're trying to address. And then they're like, oh, I remember this person, Liz. She was like really nice. It might not be a good fit. Skyflow might not be the fit, but maybe, talk to her. So if I can, it is a way to make the world a better place if it means that if I can make a developer's job easier, then they're a happier person, and then they're go out in the world and they're a happy person, and maybe it does have like these small ripple effects, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna move to a different question, which is you were a
Okay.
software engineer at Twilio, and you started working after joining a coding bootcamp. What was the experience at Twilio, and what would be the experience for someone who entered there after finishing a bootcamp to a big company?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I don't know, in light of all the recent changes in tech right now between the layoffs and this whole bank thing, I don't know if I don't know if that experience can be replicated just because times are so different. But for me, and with Twilio especially, so at that time, it was 2015, there was like a lot of growth in tech. And a lot of companies, I think it was like Airbnb and Lyft and a couple of other, SurveyMonkey, I think, they were starting these like apprenticeship programs, right, for people who come out of coding boot camps. And I think at the same time, these companies were growing so fast, they needed people to write code, right? So these coding boot camps come up. And at Twilio, they were trying to start a similar like apprenticeship program, right? And just kind of looking, I guess, for the right candidate. And I think for me, it was a lot of, I was in the right place at the right time, and I crossed paths with the right people, because I ended up talking to the guy at Twilio who wanted to start their apprenticeship program, right? They didn't have one yet, and he wanted to start it. And I can't remember how we got in touch, but we did. Went over to the office, like had lunch. It kind of took a while for him to get approval on his end to interview me and hire me and all that stuff, but then it happened. So I was kind of their prototype for this apprenticeship program that would come to be known as Hatch. And unfortunately, Hatch was eliminated in one of the recent, reorgs and layoffs over there. But it was an interesting experience because they knew they wanted to do this, but they didn't really know how to yet. So I didn't have a lot of support and structure that would be put into place later to support apprentices. It was just kind of like, here you are, like, see, figure it out. So I kind of jumped into the deep end feet first. And I learned a lot of stuff the hard way, but I guess I did a good job, because they ended up, like I said, this apprenticeship program became it became an actual program over there, like this organized program, and people apply, and there was structure and all of this. I don't know if I was attending a coding boot camp now, I don't know if the same thing would happen, because things are so different. But I'm glad that, even though Hatch is no longer, I'm glad that I was a part of paving the road for that, even if that means that when I had to travel that road, it was not paved. So I ended up falling and scraping my knees a few times along the way, but definitely helped pave the road for people to come after me. And the ability to, attend the Hatch program and then be hired at Twilio, I know has changed the lives of many people after me. So I don't know if like the tech landscape could support that story now. I don't know what would happen if I was graduating from a coding boot camp now. I think I'd be a little anxious about it, but that was my experience. yeah, I was just kind of thrown into the deep end feet first. It was like I barely knew Python, and then they were like, "Oh yeah, our stack is in Scala." I was like, "Okay, I guess I'll just do this and see what happens." But like you, I'm very stubborn and determined, so I made it work.
But the thing is that you're in a position that they can afford to teach you and how to do things. But now, as the current situation with layoffs and cutting costs, it's now a luxury for a company to offer a space for a newly coming developer to learn and to do things rather than hiring someone who's already experienced to enter in the market. So the
Yeah.
problem is that there's a lot of people who want to get into the world of programming, but they lack the experience. So when they want to go to get a job, they lack the experience to get a job. So having entry level jobs now is very difficult, which makes the rendering of the whole situation now much harder than it was in 2016. You entered into
2015, yeah.
2015. So 2015, there might be an opportunity to say we're going to foster X amount of developers. We're going to make them, let's say, like the core employees at the company after a while, because this is the whole aim of having it, to have employees to stick at the company for a very long time. But when you realize that you've fostered a huge amount of employees, and some of those employees are going to other companies or they're not sticking around, this kind of investment goes down the drain at some level.
That's yes. And I feel like that can be the risk you take either way, right? Because I don't know, you think about some, or have encountered some like CS grads, right? They're coming out of college and they're like 23. And they might know a lot, but there's nothing that really can replace that like on the job experience, right? Because like programming language is a programming language, but like companies can have so many process around like how they write their code, how they deploy their code. Is it microservices? Is it like one monolithic service? Like, so there's still, regardless of where a person learned about programming, like there is that investment, right, that they have to make. And I think, and I hope, and you're right, that the landscape is changing. We don't know. There might not just be the same kind of flexibility or resources to invest in juniors. But I think that junior developers are very good for senior developers too, right? Because there's no one else who will question how, or like make you question how well you know something, than a junior asking you, well, why is it like this, right? So I think I hope that companies will still continue to invest in more junior entry level candidates, because I think that it's a mutual investment. I think that people, like I said, regardless of whether or not they went to school for it, like they bring a perspective that I think is really important. Um, and at some point, all the senior staff is going to retire, so like might as well start like nurturing that now.
It's a little bit difficult sometimes to just nurture, because you don't know when the senior people might leave and you don't know how things are going to happen. So it's very difficult to foster for something that you might not ensure 100% is going to happen.
Yeah.
But I think this goes to the next question that I want to ask, since we're in it. But as someone who entered a coding bootcamp, what was the experience of undergoing one, even though it might reach the position that it doesn't sound sensical to undergo something that you might not know much? But recently, a lot of people entered coding boot camps because they received the promise of getting a job in the tech world. As our world shifts towards the digital world, it starts to make sense for people to do any college degree. Let's say you would study fine arts, you would study, I don't know, philosophy, and you would actually go and learn how to do code in a coding boot camp. Since some people might get, let's say, a scholarship to study philosophy, for example, at college, and they say, okay, I have a college degree in X, so I don't have to go to college anymore, but I can write code from a coding bootcamp. But certain coding bootcamps are taking advantage of those students in the sense that they are overpromising but under-delivering. Like certain bootcamps charge, let's say, the first salary from the learner, and the learner lands a job. They receive the payment from the company to refer, and they receive payments from the company that vetted those people. So how this works? So a coding bootcamp will vet you as a developer, but it also charges you for the first salary because they gave you an opportunity to learn. And then this coding bootcamp as well takes money from the company because they referred you to the pool of people that they have, since they think that they can fit you. It reaches to a position that those coding bootcamps care about making money much more than actually providing a very good service, and they want to capitalize on people's dreams, on focusing on offering a decent curriculum that just gets you a proper job. But it's not, how I'm going to say this, they're just vetting you to get a job so they can make a buck rather than actually caring about you. What is your take on this? It's a big question, but it's very...
It is a big question, and it's something I think about a lot. Because people ask me, like, should I do a coding boot camp? And I'm like, well, let me tell you my story. Are coding boot camps any more exploitative than like anything else in this world? I don't know. What I will say is that I feel like I went into the coding boot camp. Like, so yes, there is this promise of like, it's going to dramatically change your life. You're going to go from making like, you know, whatever to making six figures. And for some people, that's a big promise. That can potentially be a life-changing promise, right? And I certainly felt that myself, honestly. Like I had gotten laid off from my social media and content management job at the Dog and Cat magazine. And because like they were downsizing all this stuff, like through no fault of my own, right? They just eliminated my position. And I was like, okay, I'm living in San Francisco. It's very expensive. I don't know what to do next, except I want to make more money. So I did the coding boot camp, right? But this promise of like, oh, you just work hard and do these things and it'll be all right. It wasn't my first time hearing that promise. And it wasn't my first time being, what's the word I'm looking for? It wasn't my first time being disillusioned, because I graduated from college in 2008. And at that time in the US, there was a big recession going on, right? So I had spent my entire high school, like elementary, high school life, it's like, you're gonna go to college. When you go to college, you're gonna like study hard, you're gonna work hard, and when you get out of college, you're gonna get a job. It's gonna be great. This is what you gotta do. This is the promise. This is how you achieve a better life, right? And so, from like the age of like, 8 or 9, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go to college, and everything was like geared in that direction, right? And so I went to this like fancy college prep high school, and you do clubs, you do sports, you do extracurriculars, you do AP classes, you take the SATs, you do all this stuff because you're going to go to college, right? And then it comes to like, well, you're going to take out some student loans. And it's like, are you sure this is a good idea? And then it's like, no, it's going to be great. You're going to go to college. You'll have a college degree. You'll pay off the student loans. You'll get a great job. And then I graduated in 2008. There was a recession. There were no jobs. I would actually... So the time I was living in West Hollywood, close to Melrose Avenue, which is this street that has a bunch of like shops and coffee shops and restaurants. And at that time, I like printed out resumes and would go into each like shop, like each restaurant, each coffee shop, and give them my resume because I was just so desperate to work. And it took me, I was unemployed for like 2 or 3 years after college. So I've already had that promise, right? and I already had that promise not come through. And so I don't know if like our coding boot camp's more exploitative than these other institutions. I don't know. I think that ultimately what I did get out of college and what I did get out of a coding boot camp, which is some of the most valuable things I got out of it, was my network, right? Like my community. My friends that I made in college have, we're still friends, and they've been there for me during my, hardest, most difficult times. And same with some of the friends I made at the coding boot camp. They're some of my closest friends, and they're the people who have been there for me when I needed them. And so when I think about it that way, I'm like, okay, that's like the most valuable thing I got out of it, right? Like regardless of what happens to my job. And I think that ultimately comes down to, and this like goes back to developer advocacy in a way, right? Is that it's about community and people and relationships. And so if you're focused on that, and if you treat people kindly, and if you make sure that that your interactions with people are authentic and sincere, then I think that's what's really going to help you, like set you up for success more than anything else. So sorry, that's like a very roundabout way to be like, I don't know, right? Like, I don't know. It's kind of like what you make of it. I think that it is appropriate to be suspicious or like wary of like these promises, right? Because they sound too good to be true. And I can't deny that it did come true for me, right? Like, so I don't know, right? It's like your mileage may vary. I don't know. So yeah, that's a very roundabout way to get there.
The thing is that they still capitalize on people much more than just trying to offer the job. So now with the recession, they're going to market heavily as the only solution towards getting a job at some level.
At some level, and I would just caution people to do their research, and talk to someone who's done it before. And if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. But you're absolutely right. Like, there's going to be that space that they're going to, that everyone's going to try to take advantage of, right? And so hopefully I can offer my experience, and that can help people make their decisions, right?
But the thing is that some people, or can I say this? Some people within companies will get, let's say, a certain amount of coding bootcamp people as code monkeys, I like to call them, where the kind of people who would write code, they don't understand too much about it because the coding bootcamp already vetted them, but they are much more cheaper to render than getting, let's say, senior developers at a company to do the work. It'll be like, I want to develop a solution as fast as I can, and I really need to do it instantly. So they would hire a set amount of people, and they tell them like, okay, let's do this. We'll get 1 or 2 experienced people. Tell them like, hey, chaperone these people, and then tell these code monkeys to develop the solution with those senior developers chaperoning on them. So instead of, let's say, 5 senior developers working on our product, now you have 12 people, and then those 2 experienced people can chaperone 5 people on 5 people, and they can get things faster.
Right. But is that so bad? I mean, I don't know, right?
Isn't it a bit of it exploitative?
I mean, it's all kind of exploitative, right? And like, if the job, I mean, businesses are going to make business decisions. Like, we have no control over that, right? Like, if a business decides that they're going to hire like 12 like junior engineers instead of like, 2 senior, like, that's on them, right? Like, and we don't have any control over that. And like, that entry, that kind of simple, like, okay, we're just going to hammer out code and like move Jira tickets around and get them done. Like, that's a way to get experience too, right? And if it means that like that's someone's shot, like to give it to try it out and gain some experience, then is that so terrible? I don't know, right? Like, should everyone receive like a living wage? I mean, I think so. Where like, your basic needs can all be like met. But you never know, right? Because like if you are hired like at a junior level and maybe you're not getting paid as well, but like that's then something to put on your resume, right? That's experience, so that then you can get like, maybe get promoted or maybe move to another job where you get paid more. But like ultimately, like, like I said, businesses are going to make business decisions, and until you or I are like a CEO of a company, we don't really, we can't really, there's not much there we can control, right? It's kind of the way I feel about it. So is it bad? I don't know. Like, maybe it's more of an indicator of a greater systemic issue, right? Like, well, why are there such varying like pay differences, all of that stuff? And shouldn't everyone's basic needs be met? I don't have a solution, unfortunately. Like, I mean, I'll say that like when Twilio hired me, like, it was a little bit under market rate, and I decided to take that chance anyway because I needed it and it was important, and I've made a lot out of it. So is it bad? I don't know. Right? Like, yeah, that's a complicated question, and it's a good question. And I think that it's a question we should keep asking ourselves and keep like wondering, what are the motivations of these coding boot camps, right? And what are the motivations of the companies that hire boot camp grads? Like, why are they doing it? So yeah, it's a good question, and I don't think it has like one simple answer.
Yeah, I don't think anyone can find the answer for it because it depends on the company that is hiring. It depends on the coding bootcamp and the intentions. But it's something that I want to highlight because not a lot of people are really highlighting this. But when you get to see it in front of your eyes, but you just don't talk about it, it's very weird. Just people understand that there's like the other side of the spectrum where they see the good parts, but they just don't see sometimes the bad parts.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that transparency and honesty is important, right? And like, there's people I went to coding boot camp who are not working in tech, and that it didn't work out well for them, right? And I know people who do coding boot camp and it worked out wonderfully for them, So it's a complicated question, and I think you're very. I think you are. I think that you asking that question and wanting to shed light on like the whole spectrum of outcomes is a very good instinct, and I encourage you to keep doing that. And yeah, it's not, I think it can be a little exploitative, and I think it can be a little predatory, and you just have to do your due diligence, right?
No, here's the thing. I'll give my personal take about this. When I was 18, I was gonna just quit college and just join a boot camp and go work, but I didn't do that. But one of the questions that I asked myself when I was 18, it's like, how is this profitable? Like you start to ask yourself, it's like, how is this thing workable? Like how it's that even a valid business deal? Like if you want to look at it from the outside perspective, you see like it's a good opportunity for me to grow and to accelerate and move forward. But you want to realize something, that there's a term I like to use a lot and I love to use it, which is there's no such thing as free lunch. So, and there's no such thing as free beer. So when someone gives you a free beer, there's something behind it. There's nobody can create something out of nothing and give it to you for free. So what is the intentions behind those boot camps? Why would they want to, let's say, come up and tell you like this is going to change your life and we're going to help you? No, you're not going to help you. You're helping yourself. But the thing is that when you reach a position that you really do need a job and you really do
Mm-hmm.
need to survive, you'll do anything. Like
Mm-hmm.
you would come up and say like, okay, I'm willing to do this. But the thing is that it makes sense for them to do it because companies, let's say, don't want to open a section so they can come and vet people, and they want to hire people to take care of vetting those people because it's costly for them. It's just easier for them to get finishly vetted people onto their company without hassling to teach them about something.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're absolutely correct, and I think that that is that kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not suspicion, but being cautious, being curious, asking like, well, why is this happening? Why are they doing this? Why are they telling me this? What are they trying to get from me? I think that that's an important critical thinking skill, right? That we can, that is useful in all aspects of our life, right? Like, I don't know, like if you're buying a car, it's like, well, why are they telling me this? Like, what's in it for them? Um, when I bought my car, they were trying to get me to buy all the bells and whistles, and I was like, no, thank you. Like, that's just small motors that are going to fall apart and be expensive to fix. But like, but that's it, right? Like, what is their motivation for trying to sell this to me? Like, they don't really care that I'm more comfortable or that, like, you know, a sunroof is like, good for me. Like, that I'm going to enjoy the sunshine, right? They're more like, well, there's little tiny motors in there. They're going to break down and then I'm going to have to go and get it replaced. And it's really expensive to replace. Like, so,
Or
my
if you
car's
want to
not.
think about it, they would actually sell you the car with the most amount of percentage that they get from it versus the one that's the least percentage. I'm just going
Yeah,
to say it very, very transparently. And if they want to sell, and if you fixated on a car that they're not going to give you a huge amount of incentive from, they'll slap something else like, oh, how about if you buy insurance from us as well? We
right.
have a brokerage system. So they will find a way to make money out of you.
They,
And
they will find a way.
they will find a way. So even if, let's say, for example, you entered in a coding boot camp, they will offer you an internal service that they will make money out of you. So even if
Yeah.
there are good intentions from the outside, they will still want to make money out of you.
Yeah.
You are the
I mean,
product.
yeah, no, exactly. Exactly. You are the product. Like, I mean, like, thanks, Facebook, right? Like, if it's free, then you are the product. Um, which just means that we need to be careful, right? We need to, like you're saying, like ask ourselves those questions and employ like critical thinking, and ultimately like you try to make the best decision, but like, whatever, the coding boot camp I did, they got my money, so like there you go. Like, but it's worked out okay for me, and I think a lot of things contributed to that. I think there's lots of ways you can learn to code that are not a coding boot camp. um, And so maybe explore those options first, right? I don't know. It also depends on the person, right? Like some people are very, like if I told some people, you can tell them like, yeah, the best way to learn to like code or like get like experience that you would need on the job is like maybe try contributing to an open source project, right? But some people may not have the motivation to do that on their own. They might need the structure of a boot camp, but yeah, no, I think you are very wise to be asking like what is the motivation, and especially I think when it comes to coding boot camps and tech, I think we should all be asking that question and demanding that everyone try to operate from a place of good intention instead of exploitation, right?
Yeah. Which comes to the next question that I want to ask is, you made this shift from software development towards software relations, where you find yourself missing the most creative aspect of well, I'm gonna rephrase the questions here, which is you made an interesting shift from software development towards developer relations when you found yourself missing the most creative aspects of marketing. What made you think the decision, and what struggles you faced when undergoing that path? You could shed light from this topic if, let's say, I want to move towards, uh, like the topic that we said, if we want to move towards developer advocacy. Since developer advocacy, like I have like creative ways of marketing rather than just only writing code. Like there are some people who are really good at selling you something, but they're very good technical about it. Do you want to shed light on this?
So is the question is
You made an interesting shift from software development towards developer relations,
mm-hmm.
where you find yourself missing the creative aspect of marketing because you used to work in similar things, let's say in social media marketing, right?
Right.
Yeah. And
So
so
why? Okay. Why and how and what were the struggles? Okay. Yeah. So I so what happened was at Twilio, I was working. So I worked on the SMS product on our API for that for a while, and then I switched to a more internal facing team. And what we were building out was a testing as a service kind of platform, because Twilio uses a bunch of little microservices, but then it's like, how do we make it easier to write integration tests that then you can easily call all those microservices and make sure everything works from where your service sits and all the way downstream and all the way upstream, right? So we were developing this like internal product. And in a way it was like kind of having our own little startup within the company. It was like having your own company within the company, right? And you have to like prove your fit in the market, right? And so what I found, and it was a brand new product, right? And I found myself doing some of the work that you would already characterize as developer relations. So, yes, I was writing the code, but I was also very interested in writing the documentation, and not only writing the documentation around it, but making sure that that documentation made sense, making sure that it was accurate, and making sure that we did everything we could to reduce like any kind of onboarding friction, right? Because we were like asking people to like use this product, and they might have already had something else in place that they were using. And so I found myself doing things like I created like a brand, like a logo for us, right? And then I got stickers made, and then I would pass out the stickers to try to entice people to use our product. I would get the feedback from users and then take it back to like our tech lead and be like, okay, well, like people don't quite like this. Is this actually solving the problem we think it's solving? Is this actually even a problem in the first place? And then because what we were trying to do was get people to do more testing. I feel like testing in software is kind of like eating your vegetables. Nobody really wants to do it, but we know it's good for us. So I was trying to make it more of like a community thing, right? Like, let's talk about testing frameworks, testing strategies, and so we also had like this bi-weekly like meetup, like within the company. We'd get together and talk about it. So I was already doing these things that are very developer relations oriented. And then in 2020, things like I got burned out. I needed to take a break. I took a break, did some thinking while I was on my break, and then found myself feeling a little bit lost. Like, what do I do next? Like, something obviously isn't working. I need to find something new. And was like, okay, well, I'll move in the direction of my values, which is like community and stuff. And yeah, just started putting out the word that I was looking for it. Some of the challenges have been that I made this transition during like COVID. So a lot of in-person events weren't happening. And I feel like that's where you develop a lot of that kind of like momentum, right? So that was a challenge. Another challenge was that my first shot at developer advocacy, the the product, the company I was working for, the product was very new. So there wasn't really a product to advocate for. So it's like I didn't quite get a lot of traction there, right? Another challenge is that then when I was applying for jobs after that job, they want you to send like a portfolio of like recorded talks and stuff, and I just didn't have that. And it can be hard to build up that, like I said, that portfolio, your resume, because people want to see that you're like doing stuff, that you're doing talks, and similar to what we were talking about, or along the lines of what we we're talking about, do they want to hire a junior person and then like invest the energy in like nurturing that? But I was stubborn and persistent, and one thing that I like about working at Skyflow and working with Sean is that, he told me that, I was maybe more junior than he was expecting, but that he could tell that I was like coachable and wanted to learn, and had an innate talent for it. So I think you just got to be persistent. Don't, if you're like you're talking about earlier, how you were a kid and you loved computers and you loved coding, you didn't let anyone stand in the way of you achieving that, right? So kind of comes back to follow your heart and lean on your community.
Yeah. When Sean introduced me to you to be a guest on the podcast based on the information he sent, you mentioned that you're motivated by deep empathy and that your brain is neurodivergent in the sense that you have different needs as a learner. And this is notable in childhood where you got dismissed as a kid due to difficulties to learn certain things, like, let's say, STEM subjects. But they told you cannot be a programmer at some level.
Yeah.
But as you grew older, that empathy just became a part of your identity.
Yeah. So the empathy comes from, right. So I was diagnosed later in life with ADHD. So I was like a kid suffering with symptoms, and people don't really see it because we tend to, and this is changing now, but we tend to kind of miss some of the symptoms of ADHD when they present in little girls, right? And another thing that was kind of difficult was that in school, I excelled at right? Like certain subjects, it was so easy, like writing, history, art, creativity, anything that involved writing, I was just good at it, right? Like it was effortless. I didn't have to think about it. Writing essays was always like a pleasure. And I was doing really well in all subjects until I got to high school, right? And then you start doing more like advanced math, and you're doing physics and you're doing chemistry. And somehow there was a moment when anything that involved numbers just became challenging. And a lot of it is because so when you have ADHD, it's kind of like your brain, like everyone's brain is like a whiteboard, right? And like a normal brain is like the whiteboard is big. So you can put a lot of information on it, right? When you have ADHD, it's a very small whiteboard. It's almost like an Etch-a-Sketch, right? So you have to keep clearing space on it to make room for new stuff. And so it just becomes harder to hold information, if that makes sense. And so I struggled, and I started struggling in a big way. And it was such a stark difference between I can write an essay in 20 minutes, it's fine, versus I'm struggling with this math word problem. And I would get scared. I would start to panic. And then once you panic, it's over, right? You can't think anymore. And I think what happened was, instead of teachers working with me or helping me, it was girls don't do STEM anyway. Girls don't do that. And you're good at writing, and that's fine. So just don't even worry about it, right? So I spent my whole youth thinking that I was too stupid to do this stuff. And part of this was kind of my motivation for going to a coding boot camp and going into tech, is that I wanted to prove to myself that I actually can do it, because I was interested in programming as a kid. You talk about, Windows XP, like I was, working on I remember signing on to, I can't remember it now, but, a computer that only had 3 colors on it, and swapping out like, floppy disks and stuff like that. And my dad and I used to like build computers together. And back then there was no internet. You had to actually get a book to troubleshoot what was going on. And so I loved it. And so to receive that kind of dismissal and discouragement in high school is really hard. And it's part of my motivation for going to a coding boot camp, because I kind of wanted to prove to myself that I can do it. But as a result, I have a lot of empathy for people, especially when it comes to learning, because our brains are all so different. And my favorite kind of person to work with is a very non-technical person, because I see the moment in their eyes when they're kind of afraid, right? Where I'm like, okay, we're going to make an API call now. We're going to use terminal. And they're, it's not a big deal. It's really not. But for like someone who's non-technical, it's like, oh my God, right? And I can see the bit of the intimidation and the panic and all, and I can see it happen. And it's very rewarding for me to be like, no, you can do this. It's not scary. It's not hard. And then they do it and they get a response, right? They send out the API call, they get a response, and they're like, oh my God, I did it, right? And they do it in terminal and they feel like a hacker. And it's really wonderful to experience that moment with them, because for me, it feels like I'm discovering my love of programming all over again. And it comes from a place of just like empathy and love and care and kindness. And fortunately, in developer advocacy, I get to use that a lot. So it's very fulfilling.
Actually, you can compare this experience with, let's say, a kid who just discovered Legos, and he can put one piece in another, be like, whoa, I can do that.
Yep.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing. See a little kid when he's playing Legos. It's the same thing.
It's delightful. It's so good, especially when someone thinks they can't do it and they're like convinced that they can't do it. Like they come and they have this preconceived notion about themselves that, oh, they can't do it. Like it's too technical. They can't do it. And to show them that it is possible, and it's not like they're not going to be like writing production code the next day, but like they're going to feel like they understand, and I think that that's really important.
Yeah. There's a certain stage in life where you find that you hit a certain plateau. Like certain people reserve towards changing jobs, others reserve towards creating their own startup in which they want to create a product or offer, let's say, consultancy services. Certain people might head towards doing this because they have, let's say, an adventure, while others might, let's say, stick it safe and just stay at work and that's it. They won't do anything. Would you consider this path later on in the future? Elaborate if you want to consider it or not.
So yes, I think about this all the time, especially since I've already changed careers a couple times, and I'm only 38, so I have plenty of time left to do some other things. The thing about ADHD is that I'm very drawn to novelty, and we were talking about it earlier, but that I get a dopamine hit out of like learning new stuff. So I love learning, right? And I love new things. So my latest, like, oh, maybe I'll do this next is either, and we talked about this, maybe a therapist, or I've also been thinking about, I don't know, becoming a full-time snowboarding instructor. Like I could do summers or winters in the northern hemisphere and then summers in the southern hemisphere, or summers in the southern hemisphere. I really love snowboarding and I love teaching, and I love when people kind of have that aha moment. But yeah, there's still so many adventures ahead of me still. And, like I said, I'm just drawn to new stuff. So, when the next adventure happens, I'll let you know. We can talk about that. But yeah, stay tuned for what's next.
Yeah, it's like imagine one day, I'll be like a couple of years later. It's like, hey Liz, what are you doing? It's like, yeah, I'm a snowboard teacher now. I
Yeah.
taught one of my students to do a backflip on ice. That's cool.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and I will happily give you a lesson. So,
Yeah, yeah. But you want to know what's so cool about this is that if you taught a huge amount of people how to do it, and you do like a montage of people doing like epic shit, that
yeah.
would be so cool. That would be so cool.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking about producing a documentary about snowboarding, and I definitely want some cool, like, kind of like skate videos, but like snowboard videos, right? Like, with some like cool music. Yeah.
Uh, wait! You need to do it like, let's say, Interstellar style, where it becomes very serious, and then
Hmm.
you do like a certain action. It's like a matter of life and death kind of thing.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, it's coming. It's in the works.
But before shifting towards tech, you worked as an editorial assistant for Paris Hilton, and you have credit for a production sound work for a USC graduate film, plus having a degree in filmmaking and fine arts. You're the type of person that Sean actually told me about, which is from a dog walker to software engineer to developer advocacy, which is an interesting path a person would take. You want to talk about anything regarding this, how things happened?
How things happen. um, how things happen. I just have a lot of dumb ideas, I think, and I just keep throwing them against the wall until they stick. But so it's interesting because like people tease me about my film degree all the time. They're like, "Well, you're not working in the film industry," and like, what good was that degree? And it's like, well, but hold on a minute, because I feel like film school taught me some of the most valuable and like most transferable lessons I've ever learned. One of those lessons is how to deal with people that you may or may not like for 12 hours a day on set, right? Making a movie is really, really hard, and it can be like really physically exhausting. Like, you're setting up lights, you're dressing sets, you're wrangling actors, and it's all very expensive, and the stakes can be really high. And like, there's a lot of stuff that's just completely out of your control, right? Like, that's why you always hear about drama on sets. Like, after a 12-hour day for 12-hour days for like a week, you're sick of each other, right? So 8 hours in an office, like, I can handle that. There's a film school set me up for that. I can deal with it, right? No, but when you're on a set, if you have a good director and a good producer, like, they help everyone stay focused, and they help everyone understand what the vision is, and they help keep everyone pulling in the same direction, right? And so, that's where the other most valuable film school lesson is that project management. So I wanted to be a director. uh, the director, right, is the person who has the vision in their head, and they have to work with all these different artists who have all these different skills, right? So the director of photography, the sound designer, the editor, the actors, the writer. They have all these like different specialties, and like they have their own way of doing work. And the director is this person who has to be like, okay, how do I get everyone to collaborate and all move in the same direction, right? And as a director, you have to be really flexible too. Like the script, right? Like, so what happens is, like, you write the screenplay and you're like, okay, this is the story, and it looks great on paper. But you might get to the set and it turns out that the way you plan the scene can't happen that way, right? Or you wanted the scene to happen on a sunny day and it's actually raining that day, or like an actor is sick or whatever, right? Or sometimes it just doesn't work, right? Like, sometimes an actor says a line out loud and it just doesn't sound right. You get to set and you're like, well, we have a screenplay and we had this plan, but you get to set and you're like, okay, actually the plan isn't going to work the way we thought it was going to. So then you adapt, right? You're like, okay, well, let's rewrite this one line, or maybe we'll shoot a different scene today, or maybe today, the scene actually takes place on a rainy day. You shoot, you get your footage, right? then you get to the editing stage, right? You get to the editing. At the time it was a table, but now you do it all on the computer. Because we used to edit on. I've actually edited film, 35 millimeter film on a flatbed, but they don't do that anymore. But you get to editing, right? And you start cutting shots together and you realize they don't work, right? So you're like, okay, we had a screenplay. That was the original idea. We shot it and we realized some things didn't work. We changed it there. Now we're in the editing room and it doesn't, like, the shots don't make sense the way we thought they were going to. So how do we then adapt to that? And it's like, how do you adapt the vision without losing focus of what the ultimate message is, right? So that's, like, I feel like the other major skill that film school taught me that I've brought with me into all aspects of my life, right? Is that, like, sometimes you set out on a plan and you actually get there and it turns out it's not what you thought it was. So how do you adapt? But how do you adapt and still move in the direction that you want to go? And it's a skill that has helped me in all aspects of my life. So when people laugh at me for my film degree, I'm like, well, actually, it's very useful.
Then some random dude with a very minimal budget creates a groundbreaking movie, and then you feel you understand this kind of thing. Where someone was like, there's like movies. Have you seen these like set of movies with very minimal budgets and they're like very minimal management, and they made like groundbreaking, and you realize, wait a second, I've done all of this and I've learned all of this so that some random dude in, like, let's say in Eastern Europe can do this better than me with a minimal budget, and you feel like, fuck it, I'm not gonna do
Well,
this again.
that's like, I mean, that just means that the vision was that strong, right? Like, it takes like a real, like, you have to have a strong vision to be able to get everyone to work together. But yes.
And the same thing applies technically. Like, imagine yourself, you're working at a company and then some 19, 20-year-old goes, creates a startup and gets lucky.
Yes, sometimes it's just the way it is.
Yeah. I'm going to move to a different question. I think it's more of a personal question, which is, can you advocate for breast cancer since you are a breast cancer survivor yourself? Your type of cancer was metaplastic, which means that it's the rare and aggressive form of cancer that can shift forms after taking certain medications. You advocated on an organization called Hair to Stay, which helps provide subsidies for cancer patients to receive hair-saving scalp cooling therapy. But you resolved towards opening a crowdfunding campaign to fund parts of it, since expenses are not cheap at all. Cancer payments are still expensive worldwide. What was the experience before and after therapy? Did this experience change your perspective about life in general? You can talk
Right.
about this whatever you want.
Kind of open.
All ears.
So I think I mentioned this. I was 31 when I received my cancer diagnosis. It was completely unexpected. And like, not only like was it cancer, but it was like a particularly deadly form of it. And I didn't want to lose my hair. I didn't want to lose it. It's a terrifying prospect, right? Especially like as a woman, you know, your hairs can be so much a part of your identity. And I remember lying on the table during a biopsy and like crying just over and over again, like, I don't want to lose my hair. I don't want to lose my hair. And there was a nurse there and she was like holding my hand and helping me through the procedure. And she was like, well, there might be a possibility that you keep your hair. And so I did some research. It's called scalp cooling therapy. And the concept behind it is very simple. You cool your scalp to freezing point, right? So it's like 33. It's pretty cold. It's very cool. I can't remember how cold it is exactly, but cold enough that, like, so what they did, and the technology, as I understand, has become a little bit more sophisticated, but basically all it was these caps. Well, okay, so let me get back. So the primary concept is the concept behind it is you freeze the scalp. As a result, the blood vessels close up, right? They restrict, and then you don't get as much chemo in your scalp, which means that your hair isn't subjected to as much of the chemo, and so you don't lose as much of it. So the way we did it was you get 14 caps, and they're filled with this gel that can be frozen and then stays frozen longer than just like water. It's actually apparently the same gel that they use when they do scenes where like in a movie where someone's on fire. They actually coat them in this gel because it keeps them cool. But it also still warms up, right? So you have these 14 caps. You put it on your head, wrap it around really tight, and you have to change them every 30 minutes because they warm up. And you have to do this for 6 hours during your chemo infusion. So it's an extremely arduous, and they keep the caps in a biomedical freezer. It's serious business. You have to pay to rent the caps, and insurance doesn't cover it. So that's where the hair to stay subsidy came in. They were able to reduce it from $600 a month to $300, which was amazing. It's still expensive. But I was able to keep 75% of my hair, and it made a huge difference in my treatment. When I got up in the morning and looked at myself, I didn't see a cancer patient. And unless I told someone, people didn't know I had cancer. And it made me able to tolerate the treatment a lot better. And it meant so much to keep my hair when I had to sacrifice so much of my body to this treatment just to survive. So the way I see it is that if I can take my cancer story, and by the way, I'm 7 years in remission, which is awesome. Is it 7? Yes, it is. I was diagnosed in 2016. If I can take my cancer story, and if I can help other cancer patients learn what their options are and learn that it's possible to keep their hair, then that to me is the biggest screw you cancer, right? Then that means I'm winning. And if I can take my story and inspire and motivate someone and make the experience easier for someone else, then I'm winning. And that's kind of the same with therapy, right? Because you asked about therapy. A lot of things in my life haven't been easy. I've had to overcome a lot. I've been in and out of therapy since I was 25. And it's a lifelong journey, right? But if I can take some of the things I've been through, let's talk about learning, right? Some of the kind of stuff, the learning difficulties I experienced. If I can take that and then use it to make something good out of it, then I'm winning. Then I've won, right? I'm giving back. I'm overcoming all the bad stuff in my life if I can take the bad stuff and turn it into something good. And there are lots of very, very dark times in my life when I didn't think I'd make it out alive, but I'm really glad I'm here, and therapy has been a big part of that. And I'm actually getting ready to graduate from therapy right now because I'm feeling a lot better, but things might change and I might feel worse again and I might go back to therapy, but that's not a failure, right? You're just sometimes new challenges come up that are just harder. So, yeah, I encourage anyone out there who might be listening or watching that if you feel like you need someone to talk to, if you're feeling really desperate, if it feels like, the only way out is to do something drastic, hopefully, try to find someone to talk to, because I've been in that place too. And I'm really glad that I didn't do the things I was thinking about doing, because you never know what's around the corner, and you're not alone. So, yeah.
The important thing is that you're still moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Even if everyone deals with dark times. Just to put that in perspective, nobody's living in a sunshines and rainbows kind of life. Just to give it up, every single person has problems. just don't see them sometimes. So if you see someone kind of lacking behind, kind of like not doing well, under the weather or something like that, just trying to understand they might be dealing with stuff, but they just don't want to talk about it. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
that's a you problem that they don't want to talk about it. You need to respect their privacy, but you just understand that every single person has their own battles they need to undergo with. If you just understand that part, it would make their lives a little bit easier.
Yeah. Just
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's more like understanding pain a little bit.
Yeah, and we all have it. We're all fighting some battle, and if you think about the cancer, right? So many people didn't know I had cancer, and um, just be kind to people. And people don't want to talk, that's cool. And when they do want to talk, like, you can be there for them.
So I always end the podcast with a mental health question, which is, have you ever faced burnout or imposter syndrome? And if you did, what did you do to resolve the issue?
So yes, I have experienced burnout in a big way. Um, Once you've got burnout, I think that the only thing you can do is rest. You can't work your way through it. You can't brute force your way through it. You just have to sit back and rest. Um, what you can do, though, is prevent burnout. And I think that, you and I talked about this. You prevent burnout by establishing and making sure you assert your boundaries, right? So you only have 100% of yourself to give every day. And like I said earlier, like 50% of that you have to devote to just like maintenance, like waking up, eating, showering, dressing, going to the gym, all of that. So in reality, every day you actually only have like about 50% of yourself that you get to choose what to do with. And then of that 50%, you have to give a portion of that to yourself. So something that you do that re-energizes and that satisfies and fulfills like your soul, your spirit, right? That is something is deeply satisfying for you to do, whether that's like playing video games or journaling or snowboarding or whatever, which means that you only have a small portion to actually give to things like your job. So, maintaining that balance is actually really, really important, and remembering to nurture your own, take care of your own needs. Because honestly, like, you can't pour from an empty cup, right? So if you're giving more than you can, it's like, let's say your job, like ultimately you're not giving anything at all, right? So I know sometimes it's tempting, you just want to work hard and like put in the extra hours, and sometimes that's totally appropriate and totally cool, but there has to be that, you have to preserve some of that energy for yourself, and it is important. And so far, that's the only way I figured out how to deal with burnout, is having those very strict boundaries and making sure that I devote time to the things I love to do that are completely unrelated to work. As far as imposter syndrome goes, I don't know how to do. I don't know the solution to that one. So when you figure it out, let me know. But one thing I do tell myself is that, well, if I am an imposter, I'm a very good one, because I've managed to convince people of all these different things all these years. So if I'm an imposter, I guess I'm actually a real imposter. So does that mean am I an imposter? But
You've,
yeah, I don't know how to fix this one.
no, the fun part about this is that you morphed into different positions and different works. Like you faced imposter syndrome with every single change.
I did, and I just kind of kept moving forward.
It's like you kept moving forward. You morphed from one position to another. I was like, bro, you're the champion of imposter syndrome at some level.
Maybe, and I'm not done yet. So
it's like I'm still doing, like, let's say, software development. I have to face software development kind of thing. It's like, no, you went to a coding boot camp, you changed careers, and you entered there. It's like, you win.
Yeah. Well, Well, thank you, but I know I may make it look like I don't feel it, but I feel it every day. So, yeah, I think we all deal with that.
Thank you so much for listening to the episode. If you liked it, then feel free to watch our previous episodes and feel free to follow us on social media and rate us on your favorite podcast app of choice.